Greetings, Zimbabwe, Africa, and the world. Welcome to another episode of In Conversation with Trevor, where we go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, we are in conversation with the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Public Service Commission, Dr. Vincent Hungwe. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, Dr. Vincent Hungwe. Thank you very much for this opportunity. You have had an illustrious career, starting as a teacher, lecturer, joining the civil service, and going to United Nations Development Program. And now you're back in Zim. Why are you back at a time as this? Some people would think, hey, this is a time to be out in the diaspora.
Thank you very much for that. And also characterizing my career as illustrious. It's the first time somebody has done so. I've been in government, in public service, if you like, for about 25 years. And also in international civil service for about 7-8 years. And I came back to Zimbabwe in December 2017 at a very momentous time in the history of our country, where there were new opportunities for Zimbabweans to communicate the message eloquently that the responsibility of building a new Zimbabwe consistent with the vision that has been so eloquently and lucidly articulated by His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa of creating, transforming Zimbabwe into a upper middle income economy and society cannot be farmed out to anybody. It is the responsibility of citizens, and citizens have to demonstrate that they're committed to that particular call.
So you're ready for the assignment?
Pretty much.
So you reading through this document, you talk about work-life balance. What does work-life balance look like for Dr. Hungwe? How do you relax?
Work-life balance is all about ensuring that persons that commit themselves to doing certain things within the private and the public domain also have lives. Lives as children, as fathers, as mothers, as grandmothers, as grandfathers, and also they have friends because they are part and parcel of community. For me, work-life balance is really about giving the best I can when the time so requires, but also making it possible for me to be with friends and family. And for me, it is about playing football. Used to be, but it's now become very dangerous because of my age. But I've now migrated to playing a lot of golf. I'm an avid golf player.
Well, what are you reading now? What book are you reading? Do you love reading?
I read quite a lot, but I also am forced to read from time to time by my wife. Recently, she bought about 2 books for me. I'm happy you have asked about this. The book by Tom Nichols is called The Death of Expertise. Some kind of a tour de force of sorts that seeks to campaign against the ever-increasing wave of attacks against specialists, against experts, and some kind of a blaring, if you like, of a fact on one hand, and opinion, and in some instances outright lies on the other.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I've gone through the Public Service Commission strategy plan. It's an amazing document.
Thank you very much.
if all that is in here was implemented, we would have an amazing public service commission and amazing civil service. What is the risk of this gathering dust in another cupboard somewhere?
Well, the risk of it gathering dust on the shelves, as it were, is very limited, if existent at all. Why? Because of the nature of the document itself. I'm happy you recognize the substance of it, but it is a substance that, in fact, was not born out of the Public Service Commission, as it were. It is a substance that pretty much reflects the author of that document. And the author of that document, as I've said before, is His Excellency the President of Zimbabwe, Comrade Emmerson Mnangagwa. The purpose, which is pretty much indicated in the vision, the organizational structure that is required to drive it, and the fundamental principles and values that underpin it, things that the President himself has been articulating for over the past 18 to 24 months.
What's fascinated me is the authority around the document of we want, as a commission, you want to be in charge.
Correct.
In directing the civil service and the commission in making sure that delivery of service, delivery of quality service to the public, which is something which is we're not used to seeing that. There is force in this document of wanting to change the thinking, of wanting to change the things that have been done. Just take me through the principles that guided you in the process of getting to this document.
The principles that guided us pretty much arise out of the policy clarity that has been presented to us. It's very clear that in order for us to get to 2030 as an upper middle income society and economy, there is going to be very significant pivoting in the nature of the leadership that is required. There is going to be significant pivoting away from an excessive preoccupation with the politics of our country. Very important. But at the end of the day, good politics is always a function of good economics. And the pivoting towards enhancing economic growth as the basis upon which sustainable social development and political stability can be predicated is a very, very important fundamental principle that has informed us.
Talk to me about you transforming the commission to being an employer, because most of us used to know the commission as an employer for government or providing that service for government. But now this is transformative.
Yep.
Talk to me about that.
Yep.
and any headwinds that you're facing in that regard.
Yes, it's all about. It's all also about mindsets. The commission can no longer continue to become inward-looking. Its vision hitherto has been that we want to be the employer of choice. There's nothing wrong with that. But being an employer of choice must have a strategic purpose behind it. Being an employment of choice means that you have got a higher level objective, purpose, mandate, and vision. And that purpose is to ensure that we create the necessary capacities within the public sector itself to be able to understand what its mandate is about, to be able to understand what its functions are, to be able to understand how those strategic interventions that are required to achieve a mandate can actually be effectively facilitated. So the Public Service Commission is no longer going to be inward-looking. It is actually going to be outward-looking, not to become necessarily an employer of choice and end there, but to be an employer of choice that has got the capacity to effectively facilitate what each and every one of our delivery units in the form of line ministries, their departments and agencies can actually do on the ground. And that in itself requires a very fundamental transformative change in terms of how we think and do our work. And over the years, you will find that the Public Service Commission has, because of this inward-looking perspective of what its mandate is about, has also tended to focus on, no, we are about recruiting people, appointing them, and ending there. Now, the question is more fundamental and deeper than that. The question is, what is the nature of the structure that the person that we are going to recruit going to be like? What is the nature of the skills, the knowledge that that person must have? What is the nature of the values that that person must espouse in the way they conduct themselves and in the way that they do business? We must move away from an understanding that says performance can no longer be an issue. We want a new culture blueprint that says we are going to be high performance, motivated, we are going to be accountable, we are going to be responsive, we are going to be more ethical in the way we do our business, and we are also going to be able to ask questions about the extent to which we are actually achieving the vision that the president has articulated.
You've got a huge mandate. I mean, how many people are we talking about that fall under the commission, that fall under the civil service, and are you able to break them down into gender, into professional and non-professional?
Yes, the public service, as we currently stand, is about 205,000 employees. And by public, and I'm leaving out the armed forces,
Sure.
The Zimbabwe National Army, the police and prisons and correctional services. 57% of those employees are women. So we are doing well from that global aggregate perspective. And 64% of those are young people between 25 and 45 years. And 62% are in the ministries of education, primary, secondary education. And if we put in the health sector, the number increases to 82%. And I was looking at the total picture of the number of directors, deputy directors, directors, chief directors, and permanent secretaries. It's not a lot. It's about 1,000, maybe 100 people. But there we have a very, very serious challenge with respect to gender. We have recently established that 68% of those people at the higher levels are male, and therefore we need to address that issue.
They're older and male too, isn't
they're
it?
older and male, in fact. About 52% of deputy directors and above are above 48 years old. So yes, they are older and male, but also we are sitting on a very interesting civil service demographic dividend, if you like, of 68% of our employees being between 25 and 45 and 45
That's a
years.
good thing.
Yep.
That's a good thing.
But the critical issue, Trevor, is this, and I come back to the fundamental values and principles that must underpin the way we are going to do our business. There are certain things that we have been doing in the past that actually belong to the past. The nature of our uptake of technology and systems that are pretty much consistent with our capacity to remain competitive in terms of the pricing and in terms of the accessibility of our services requires a transformation that is technologically based. And in the majority of cases, those very same people that we are talking about as constituting our civil service demographic dividend potential require some kind of a transition from old-fashioned ways of doing business, from old-fashioned work processes to work processes that are likely to be more efficient, more cost-effective in terms of the delivery of services.
You've spoken about the new workplace,
Yes,
and the resistance to technology
absolutely
within the civil
this
service.
is exactly
Talk to me about
yes.
that.
You know, it's a pity that the very same age group that we talked about, which is above your deputy director, all the way to permanent secretaries, seem to be quite resistant. But over
Why?
Oh, well, I suppose because it's a mindset. There has never been a very pointed plan, structure, and operation that has sought to enhance their either technological nous or technological.
So they're
finesse.
afraid of technology. They're afraid of change. What are you going to do to make sure that this happens?
Well, we have been put in place a mechanism between ourselves, Office of the President, and in particular the e-government unit within the Office of the President, and also with the ministry responsible for information communication technology, to ensure that we are going to provide the requisite training in order for them to uptake in terms of the skills and the knowledge required.
We've already gotten into the question that you asked as we embarked onto this mammoth project, yes, which is the civil service fit for purpose? Correct. And I must quote what you said, yes, here, which I found interesting. You said, as you asked this question, we experienced an excruciating mix of embarrassment with the answers we got and an anguish and frustration with the terrain we have to cover. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the embarrassment that you've had to discover, yes, as you try to understand the civil service of the past and where you want to take the civil service.
Well, the embarrassment is also in the analytical document. If one were to go through the SWOT analysis that we undertook and the PESTEL that we also undertook, you will find the instances of embarrassment. Let me lay this one out for you. Government has got 21 ministries. Throw in the Office of the President, throw in the Public Service. You would expect normally to have 21 chief accounting officers, mm-hmm, in the ministry. When we came in July 2018, in fact, we recognized that at the level of permanent secretaries, which included our principal directors, chief directors, and so forth, we were sitting on something like 98 individuals, right? These are people who are sitting at the level of chief accounting officer,
for 21 ministries.
For 21 ministries. And of course, they go under very interesting monikers of permanent secretary, accounting permanent secretary, non-accounting principal director, senior principal director, and all those kind of things. And of course, that was an embarrassing situation. We want a situation where each and every ministry has got a chief accounting officer. That is the beginning of the story, and that's where it ends, right? And we have taken steps to ensure that that issue is actually
what steps
addressed.
Have you taken there?
Well, the majority of the principal directors and the permanent secretaries, some of them have already been sent on retirement. In many instances.
Do we have specific numbers there?
Yes, I think when we had the new cabinet announced sometime after the July elections of 2018, we reduced the number of all accounting permanent secretaries to equal the number of the line ministries that His Excellency established. And we keep on addressing that issue. And it's an ongoing process.
Quickly looking at the pastel analysis that you
Yes.
talked about, I was surprised to find you have a line there that says there are certain civil service who are not committed to government programs. Does that concern you?
It does, especially when the commitment is lacking at in zones where you expect the greatest potential in terms of delivery as you move forward. But some of these things also arise out of the fact that there is no pointed, focused attention at changing mindsets, at making persons more patriotic, recognizing the kind of roles that they have to play, and recognizing the nature of the attitudes that they have to bring to work. Some of them also arise out of lack of capacity on our part as leaders to actually demonstrate in terms of the way we behave and in terms of the way we do our own work. It's not very easy for your youngsters within the civil service to become committed if the permanent secretary on a day-to-day basis is not at work.
There's a disjuncture sometimes between what the president says and what you see happening at the civil servant level, which raises the question, do some people get the president's mantra of a new dispensation, of Zimbabwe is open for business? Because you do see conduct and behavior that goes counter those two mantras. Zimbabwe is open for business, the 2030 vision, and you say to yourself, do these people, senior civil service, get that mindset? Have they changed their mindset, or they belong to the past? What's your view on that?
Yeah, they could well belong to the past, but our experience is that the uptake of the new attitude, the direction in which we would want to go, has been quite interesting on the part of the chief accounting officers that we have, in the sense that remember this time around we did not necessarily confine ourselves to recruiting people at the level of chief accounting officers from the civil service. For the first time, we also have recruited civil servants from outside the civil service. In some instances, even from the diaspora. We have quite a number of permanent secretaries that have come back to serve, and that in itself has injected some element of commitment, some element of patriotism, and some element of wanting to own the results that are going to come from the work that we do.
You've spoken quite eloquently about a new culture blueprint.
Yes.
And as you know, Peter Drucker said, culture, it's a strategy for breakfast.
Correct.
And Katie Kaufman and Kathy Sorensen have come up and said, culture, actually, it's a strategy for lunch. What are you going to do to drive this culture change? This new culture blueprint that you have could be dead before arrival if the culture drive is not forcefully implemented.
Yes, you're right. In our structure, we have an entire agency that is going to focus the greater proportion of its energies, plans and work on matters relating to strategic planning and program management. And therein also lies the units that are going to drive an advocacy dimension, a communication dimension, and a culture change agenda. And we are going to ensure that that very same approach is going to be cascaded in all the line ministries. There is not going to be a line ministry that will not have advocates, communication experts, and change management entities to drive the culture change that we're looking at.
Let's look at the values that you're pursuing in your new culture blueprint, which to me look very impressive. If you could just unpack them and see what effect they will have in actually changing the attitudes of the civil service and the service that they give to the public.
The first one really is about patriotism. The responsibility for making Zimbabwe a better country for all its citizens lies with its citizens. It's not going to be possible to contract out, to farm out that responsibility. So the issue of patriotism must be front of mind to us as we do the culture change, as we drive the culture change agenda. The second one is high performance. High performance pretty much entails the issue of planning for performance and appraising performance and rewarding good performance and ensuring that you take action to align bad performance with purpose, right? Purpose of the organization. I'm moving away from punishing non-performance. And there are specific units that are going to be put in place for that. The other issue relates to ethical conduct in the way public servants do their business. And as the Public Service Commission, we have committed ourselves to work very closely with the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission in order to flush out any public servants that would be involved in conduct that is unethical. There is also the issue around accountability. And accountability is pretty much about making sure that individuals are brought to account at all levels for the responsibilities and the resources that they have been given to be able to perform certain functions. And the other principle really is about monitoring and evaluation. Each and every individual's performance must be tracked. Each and every individual's impact, sustainability of their actions, and the relevance, the effectiveness, the efficiency with which this is actually done must actually be evaluated on a biannual basis and on an annual. Lastly, we also need to ensure that in order for people to be able then to meet all those standards, we must transform ourselves into a learning organization, an organization that accepts that as you apply yourself, there's a possibility that you will make mistakes, but those mistakes then ought to be used as the basis upon which we can predicate our improvements as we go forward.
There's been announced the system of ensuring that people do come to work, that you don't have ghost workers. The biometric system, how far is that? Has it started being implemented? And if so, are you seeing any results at all? There's been established now an interministerial committee that is looking at that issue that is chaired by the Secretary of Commissions here, and includes quite a number of other ministries, the Registrar, the Office of the Registrar General, Minister of Finance, our Salary Services Bureau, and Pension Fund, and the Pension Office, I beg your pardon,
and the Office of the President and Cabinet. As we speak, I think plans are underway to undertake some study visits to Tanzania, where the biometric registration system has, at least on the basis of the reports that we have, they have shared with us, has been found to be quite effective with respect to dealing with the challenge around ghost workers. And of course, we've received support from two entities, principally the United Nations Development Programme and the World Bank, to make sure that this becomes a reality.
Do we have an idea of how many of these ghost workers we have? I mean, ghost workers, do we know where they are, how many there are?
It would be quite interesting. By their very nature,
yes,
ghosts, I'm told, cannot be seen and cannot be counted. But there was an audit report that was undertaken by the Public Service Commission. I think it was 2015, if I'm not mistaken. That pretty much indicates that there are individuals that that appear on our payroll, but in fact are not supposed to be there.
What number is that?
If my recollection serves me right, there was no specific figure that was given, but there were instances that were identified that could create that particular situation. There were instances where individuals could get to a primary school, for example, satellite primary school in a new resettlement area, total population of pupils, maybe 300, 400. Under normal circumstances, you would have something like 6, 7 teachers. But yes, on the ground, there are 6, 7 teachers, but on the Salary Services Bureau, there are maybe 10 or 11 teachers that are being paid.
Wow. Let's move now to the efforts that you're now investing in to build a civil service that's fit for purpose. And I think critical to that is your remuneration structure. And I see that you are saying that the Public Service Commission is moving away from rather leaning more towards non-monetary incentives.
Correct.
Which will still cost. Do you want to help us understand what that is going to look like?
Yes. There's always been a tendency to want to look at salaries and conditions of service in purely monetary terms. Well, you're right. At the end of the day, everything, when you monetize it,
it costs.
It costs. But there has been a tendency to say, in order for us to be effectively attract, motivate and retain our employees, we must pay higher salaries. That's important. I'm not in any way suggesting that salaries are not important. But salaries ought to be looked at in the context of the total package of factors that effectively motivate employees.
Right.
It's not always a salary. There are a whole host of other, let's call them non-monetary, although we know we can monetize them, non-monetary benefits around career development, a clear career development path, the ability to be able to create assets whilst you are working, the ability to be able to meet the basic needs of family whilst you are working, and even in retirement, to be able to send children to school, to be able to provide certain facilities like transport, to be able to have a home, to be able to access medical care, to be able to invest so that you can then begin to create assets that you can make use of as and when you are retired, and also to prepare for retirement. In other words, the pension that we define right at the beginning must actually be sustainable in terms of its delivery when somebody retires.
Right.
All these things, in our view, are very, very important.
And you're focusing on that.
And
You're
we are
working on
focusing
ensure that those are
And
part of the
this,
benefits.
This
yeah?
is the context in which we have established a new agency called Pay, Benefit Development, and Benefit Management. And that benefit development is saying, how else can we ensure that beyond paying a salary, we can mobilize other facilities in order for our employee to become better motivated and therefore provide us with the kind of service that we expect.
I've looked at your strategic plan results framework.
Yes.
How happy are you with the progress as you tick the box in terms of what has been done and what has not been done?
We are not happy with the progress this far, and that's why we also indicated at the launch that we want everybody to keep us on our toes. It would have been our expectation that by now we should actually be not talking about assisting line ministries with the structures that they ought to be having in order to drive their mandates. But there are instances where this is happening. But globally, in aggregate terms, we are confident that come December 2020, all the barriers, the challenges around policies, around systems, around institutions, around structures, around processes, around attitudes, and so forth, ought to have actually been cleared off the way.
Dr. Hungwe,
yes.
There are still certain places right now which frighten a lot of Zimbabweans to come to face with the civil service. The passport office,
yes.
Immigration at our border posts, attitudes have not changed. The attitudes of civil services, they see themselves as being there to say no and to make the life of citizens difficult. Mm-hmm. This success of our economic reforms mm-hmm. will stand and fall mm-hmm. on the basis of your ability to implement this. What assurances can you give Zimbabweans that the experience that they're getting at the border posts, passport offices and that kind of stuff, mm-hmm. ought to be a thing of the past by the time the strategic document has been implemented?
Not by the time the strategy has been implemented, but within the time frames that the strategy indicates that some of these problems ought to have been addressed. One of the challenges that we have is this over-reliance on the human interface. And it happens in different domains. And the cases that you adverted to are relevant in this regard. And one of the things that we are doing at the registrar's office is to ensure that we reduce that human interface to the extent possible. But that does not entail that we are going to get rid of human beings. So a combination of technology-related interventions, changing our workflow systems, and also changing the attitudes of civil servants is going to pretty much contribute to the resolution of that of the problems that you mentioned. Here, the Public Service Commission, we have also been told that because of the human interface, many people end up being employed in the civil service than who ought not to be there. Why? Because the human interface has actually intervened to allow them to worm their way into the civil service. And we are working on making sure that we transfer our recruitment, selection, and appointment, promotion processes onto an ICT-based platforms.
This document, Dr. Hungwe, is so candid. You know, I encourage a lot of Zimbabweans who want to understand what you're trying to do to get a copy and read. I'm going to read a paragraph here and then ask you my last question. Okay. You say, risks abound in the public sector and it manifests as employees coming to work and doing no work, the prevalence of ghost workers and deceased persons appearing on pay sheets and pension schedules, inadequate systems and procedures in sensitive areas, loss of assets through theft, negligence, ineffectual employment of resources, no performance measures, and all that kind of stuff.
Correct.
What assurance, as the number one implementer of this strategy, can you give to Zimbabweans? I'm going to give you an opportunity now to address Zimbabweans regarding these shortfalls that you yourself has so candidly identified.
My immediate reaction to Zimbabweans is that they can rest assured that the Public Service Commission, under our charge, will adopt an attitude that says there is not going to be anybody who will be spared the road if the road becomes a necessary instrument in order for us to be able to transition from a culture that is characterized by the maladies of the nature that you articulated to one where the civil service is characterized by a high performance culture, a culture of accountability, a culture that respects ethical conduct, and a culture that also ensures that each and every person is actually rewarded on the basis of their performance, and a culture that says non-performance has got no place within the civil service.
Sounds like this is the end of the uncivil servant.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Dr. Hungwe, thank you so much for coming on to In Conversation with Trevor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for welcoming us into your offices.
We do appreciate the ever opening up of opportunities for us to have these kind of national conversations, because it is only on the basis of conversations of this nature that we are better able to identify where the gaps are and the nature of the interventions that are required in order to close them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for watching. Don't want to miss out on these insightful conversations? Subscribe to our YouTube channel.